So, Dr. Hafen, have you wrapped up your classes for the summer semester? You're muted.
So I actually wasn't teaching this summer.
Oh, okay.
So my wife and I have 5 kids. So we were spring was interesting and fun for us, and then the summer we've sort of taken the time to create a plan for the fall. So been a lot of fun, but we were hoping to do some traveling. Obviously that didn't happen, but no, so I didn't actually teach this summer.
If you were in position to get some VR goggles for the whole family,
that's right.
some virtual travel.
I actually tried that out. A friend in Florida I went down to visit him I guess it was last year, and it was like one of those where you can do like the games and stuff. Mm-hmm. It was very unnerving at first, but it was surprising how quickly you get into it.
Oh. Yeah,
it was it's such a, like, you create this barrier around you so that mm-hmm. if you're walking through it, you won't walk into a wall or whatever. But it was it was really weird, but really interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing how strong our minds can convince us of stuff that's not Definitely. There. But you already know that you are a psychologist. All right, Idris, you got it.
All right, so we're gonna start. So welcome, Dr. Hafen. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Idris O'Connor, and I am going to be your host for today's Summer Sampler Series lecture. A few housekeeping details for today. This session is about instruction specifically. All conversations in this session will be centered around that. If you have any questions that are not related to the lecture, you should put your question in the chat box. And when you do that, it'll automatically give us your email address and contact information. We'll use that contact information to answer your question by tomorrow close of business. We ask that you keep your computer muted during the session. If you have a question related to the lecture, please put it in the chat box and we'll present it on your behalf. When we have 5 minutes left at the end, we'll open up the mics and give participants a chance to ask questions about the lecture. Dr. Chris Hafen, we already know that you hold a PhD in developmental psychology, which is understood to be a study of thinking, feeling, and behavior change throughout a person's life. This fall, you will be teaching one section of Psychology 200, Principles of Psychology. You are teaching 2 sections of PSY 213, Statistics for Behavioral Sciences. You are also teaching section PSY 219, Cross-Cultural Psychology. Finally, you are teaching PSY 230, Developmental Psychology as well. All of the classes you're teaching will be delivered through a live format like the lecture you're about to give today. Just a quick questions for you, Dr. Hafen. First, how long have you been teaching in general, and how long have you been with NOVA? And second, what are your thoughts on the student and professional relationship during remote instruction this fall?
So I've been at NOVA full-time for 5 years, and teaching, I was in, my first class I taught was in graduate school, which was 2006, I believe. So I've been teaching for off and on for 14 years. For a while after graduate school, I was at UVA as a research scientist. So I taught a few classes while there, but my primary role there was research. So it wasn't until I joined NOVA 5 years ago that my primary role really shifted to instruction. I think to the second question, I was listening to the professors speak before. It's an interesting environment. Professionalism is interesting. So, for instance, I can sit here in a NOVA shirt and present to you all today and to students. I can wear shorts if I want, which I would never wear at work. So whether it's professional for me to say that or not, right? But students, it's sort of different for them because they're normally coming into the classroom environment, you know, in person. You know, they may not necessarily dress the same way that I'm dressing as the professor, but they know that they're in a public eye. It's much easier, and since they're typically at home, for them to sort of be in a casual environment. In the spring, I had students who were on video sipping beverages, for instance, and I had a good enough relationship with them to say, you know, that's probably not a good idea, and I did that after the class was over, so as not to sort of put them on the spot in the moment. But I think the real advantage to this environment is, you know, now for the first time I'm recording my lectures. So every lecture I give is recorded and posted to the class website in Canvas, which really gives students a powerful advantage when they're studying for tests, when they're writing papers, when they're reviewing material for assignments that they didn't have before. So I think there's a balance, but it's one that I'll have the advantage this fall, which I didn't have in the spring, of setting that tone right from the beginning of the semester, so that students can enter into the classroom environment virtually in a comfortable way, rather than at times in spring, I think a lot of students experience some stress as a result of the transition because it was unknown and it was unfamiliar.
Okay. All right. So, so we're going to begin the lecture. So today your lecture will feature academic reflections on the human condition. I'm excited to hear about this topic. We look forward to your lecture, and the forum is yours.
Thank you very much. So when I decided to do this, I had the advantage, since I wasn't teaching this summer, of kind of thinking about what would be an appropriate topic for someone who really didn't know anything about developmental psychology. And so I am going to focus in that topic. What I'm going to do with this lecture is actually combine across a few lectures that all the material comes from my Psych 230 developmental psychology class. But I typically don't present it all in the same lecture. So we'll give you a sort of a brief snapshot. I wanted to present on happiness because it's one of these, we would call it a construct if we were studying it. It's one of these constructs that is very subjective. And so it's an interesting one because we all sort of have this notion in our heads that we want to be happy, whatever that means. We don't really think about what it means, but we all want to be happy. Given the choice, we'd rather be happy than not happy. And so I thought it'd be an interesting way to present some theories which sort of guide and shape, that aren't specific to happiness, but that kind of give us a sense for the developmental process throughout the lifespan. Before I do that, since this is giving people a sample of what it's like to enter my classroom, typically in the beginning of the semester, I try to give students a little more personal face to who I am as a professor and how I got to the classroom environment. So just a quick kind of overview of my background. I grew up actually in Southern California. So this is my high school, actually, Long Beach Polytechnic. It's a really big part of why I ultimately got into psychology. I was really fascinated. It was a huge school. I think we had, my senior year, there were like 4,600 students. There was something like 1,300, I think, in my graduating class. And that really sort of got me thinking about people in a different way at an early age, thinking about why people are different, but why people are similar. After high school, I was a typical student in the sense that I probably could have done a lot better than I actually did in terms of GPA. But I saw college as like, that was the path. My mom was a teacher. That was always instilled in me. I went to college for a year at a university in California and ended up dropping out. I didn't really find an interest, and I didn't really personally explore enough to really give myself a chance to find an interest. And so I worked for a year. And I actually, one of the reasons I love working at a community college is I actually got back into school at a community college. I knew I wanted to go back to college, but I also knew that since I needed to be paying for it, I needed a cost-effective way of going back into school until I could figure things out. And in my first semester, I took an intro to psychology class, the Psych 200 class that I now teach. And that a first year student, first semester student would often sign up for. And it changed my perspective. It clicked. It took everything I was interested in from high school about people, and we were actually learning about it, why we think that way and what that means for behavior. And it totally changed my pathway. I ultimately transferred to university, got involved in research, then went to graduate school in South Florida at Florida Atlantic University, and got my degree in developmental psychology. And then I had never really been to Virginia. So as you know, any good adult does when they're ready to get a job, I just picked the job that felt right. I was fortunate enough to have an offer to work at UVA. I had never visited UVA. I interviewed virtually because I was down in South Florida. It wasn't until after I got the job that I actually first visited the campus. And if you've been to UVA, you know the culture surrounding UVA is very unique in a lot of different ways, and some of that's good and some of that's bad. But I really enjoyed my time there. I was there for 5 years as a research scientist. The thing I missed is when I would teach at UVA, I taught essentially the Psych 230 class I teach now. I had 530 students when I taught that class. Could not tell you very many names from that class. I could not tell you very many stories about the students, background, where they're going, where they're from, what their hopes are. When I got to Nova 5 years ago, that completely changed. So I'm actually able now, I have in any class about 30 to 35 students typically, a few less for my statistics classes. I can tell you about students from the spring. I can tell you about things that most teachers wouldn't know, that maybe some things even that their parents don't know in terms of what they're worried about and what they're thinking about. And that really matters to me. So I thought I'd just kind of start there with that before jumping into the lecture. So what I'd like to do now is something I use in my classes occasionally. If you have a phone or if you're on a computer, you can, if you just go to this website, it's kahoot.it. You don't have to type in the www. So it's KAHOOTIT. And what we're going to do, I just have a couple of quick questions to kind of assess where people are coming into this lecture in terms of their perceptions. So,
right.
In a second, go ahead.
So could you turn up your mic volume?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that better? Can you hear me better?
A little bit more? That's perfect.
So go ahead and enter this pin into the screen. Let me just mute this annoying user. Sorry about that. Bad time for me to turn up my mic volume with that music going. So what's going to happen is in a second, once people get a chance to join, I'm going to start the Kahoots is what they call it. And it'll just gonna have two questions. It'll be very quick. One's gonna be about kind of your process of thinking about the world in general, and then one's gonna be more specific to the concept of happiness. If you can't get in, don't worry about it. It'll display, the questions will display on my screen, so you'll be able to see them. So I'll go ahead and move us along here. I'm just gonna get started. What'll happen is you'll see the question on my screen, and then on your phone, it will, after it gives you a chance to read, it will give you the options to choose from. The faster you answer, the more points you accrue. So it's kind of a nice competition-based way for students to get involved. So, okay, here we go. So the first one, you can learn new things, but you cannot really change your basic level of intelligence. Do you agree or disagree with that? I think that's true or false. Okay, so a little bit of disagreement, which is good. We'll talk about why that's false and how that relates to a process that a researcher by the name of Carol Dweck calls having a growth mindset. The second question, and this is the last question. This also, yeah, I forgot the leaderboard. So Coach answered correctly quickest, so Coach is in the lead currently. The second question, at what stage of life are individuals the most happy? And by this, I mean like they self-report being the happiest. Okay, so good. Again, some disagreement. The majority of you are spot on. It's somewhat counterintuitive at times for people to think about this, but we'll talk in a second about some reasons why that the last stage of life is often the happiest. So here they give you, you'll get the podium with just 2 questions. It's not the most robust way of assessing it, but our winner was, and you get the nice highlight here. Bo was our winner for this Kahoot. So I'm going to go ahead and take us back to the lecture. I'm speaking through the computer mic, so I've moved a little closer. So hopefully that's a bit clearer for everybody as we go forward. Okay, so as we're thinking about happiness, one of the things that probably comes to mind is well, what exactly is happiness? We look at it in a couple of different ways. There are researchers whose entire job is just studying happiness. And it really depends. Most of the time when we think about being happy, it's more like a fleeting happiness, what we call hedonic happiness. It's about feeling good. So every day you experience sort of that elevated mood of just, feeling really good and feeling what you might label happy, but that doesn't last very long. If you have a typical day, you have ups and downs, and that's normal. Some of us have more ups than downs, some of us vice versa. What we're talking about when we think about happiness in a research context like the question I just asked, it's more of a contentment with one's life, of having sort of feeling like you have a purpose, a more kind of a broader construct of happiness where you're really thinking in a more of a, does my life really have meaning? And we each draw that in different ways. Some of us draw that from work. Some of us draw that from relationships. Others draw that from doing things in the community. So helping others in a sort of more grand or broad way. And when we look at the trends, this is taken from some Gallup poll research, which anytime you do a poll of any sort, as we know from our last presidential election, it's not always accurate in terms of prediction, but multiple sources tend to all come back here. And while this is from 10 years ago, the data is pretty consistent in the overall message that the end of life, and again, we should sort of keep in mind that not everybody lives to this stage of life. Fortunately, as a society, technological and health advancements have meant that most of us will probably reach our 70s. But the trough that you see here in the middle is really one that I want to focus on in the lecture today, because there are some things that sort of raise this bar a little bit, things that we know about in terms of how one can kind of structure their life that actually help. I don't have answers. I hope no one came in here thinking I'm going to leave this and I'll always be happy. But what I do have is sort of the theory and research that suggests ways to avoid this trough, particularly in sort of the middle years of adulthood. So one of the things to start with is thinking about happiness as what we call a social construct. So when you think about being social, that inherently means involving other people. As humans, we're very social beings. In fact, when we struggle the most are usually times when we feel isolated or lonely for various reasons. If you just think about, in the last week or two, when something's gone well, you did something really great with work, or someone gave you a compliment about something and it really just sort of lifted you up. If you think about who you share that news with, right? Those are people that you really want to go to whenever something's going well. Conversely, if you think about, something you've really struggled with recently, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's, the current context of society and feeling like you can't really connect with people in the way you want. Who are the people you go to there? And for most of us, especially as we get older, the people we go to in the good times are the people we also go to in the bad times. But you can probably also think of people that don't really handle the struggle times very well. If you go to them for advice or with something you're struggling with, some people want to just fix it for you, which is usually not what we want as seeking advice. Other people seem like they just don't really care very much. And so as we develop, we also start to learn who we can count on in those times and who maybe we can't count on as much. The first theory that I'm going to get into, and these are the three that I'm going to talk about, and I talk about them in my Psych 230 class in great depth. I'm not going to get into as much depth today. The first theory that I want to highlight is called self-determination theory. It wasn't a concept that was completely created by the researchers when they first wrote about it and labeled it self-determination theory, but it was the first time that someone really took these three aspects and really put them together in a cohesive theory. Those three needs being autonomy, connection, and competence, and I'll talk about what those three aspects mean. The second theory that I'm going to cover is based on that first question about mindset, what we call mindset. Carol Dweck wrote this book, and I've actually got a picture of it here. And I've got a copy of it. If anybody is interested in it, I'd be happy to sort of figure out a way to either mail it to you or whatever else, because I've read it a number of times. And she writes about growth versus fixed mindsets. And as a faculty a few years ago, we actually read the book and then had some discussions about it, which were eye-opening. And the third theorist is really my favorite theorist. He's a developmental theorist. His career spans sort of the mid 1900s to the end of the 1900s. He did a lot of writing. He was actually a disciple of Sigmund Freud, which if you know that name, Freud had some really kind of interesting ideas, many of them very wild. Erickson took a lot of those ideas and made them applicable to writing his stage theory. And he started in infancy and went all the way through to the end of life. And that's one of the reasons I really value his writing. So I'm going to sort of talk about each of these theories and how they relate to happiness. None of them really wrote about happiness, but their theories are very informative for how to live a content life. So the first theory, as I mentioned, self-determination theory, the three things that they talk about are what they call needs. And they said that in childhood, in adolescence, in adulthood, if we're struggling to have these needs met, then we tend to feel a hit to either self-esteem or motivation, or in the topic today, when you're feeling the least happy are usually when these needs aren't met very well. Autonomy is about freedom. So a simple question to ask yourself in any area, if you're experiencing autonomy or not, is, am I free to do what I want? Do I get to choose how I complete an assignment in a college course or in a high school course? That's what autonomy is, and it applies in different aspects. You might feel autonomous in your work environment, but maybe not in your marriage, or vice versa. And so it applies differently in different contexts. Competence is more of a feeling of achievement or accomplishment. So, as a parent, if I felt competent as a father, that would mean that when I'm engaging with my kids, I feel like I'm doing the things I need to do to raise them to reach adulthood in a healthy and functional way, right? That would give me a sense of competence. The last is connection, and this is one I'm going to highlight. I mentioned earlier we're very social beings as human beings. And really it's kind of this, some people write about authenticity. It's the sense of like, do the people around me, the people that I spend the most time with, the people that I value, do they really get me? Do they really understand me? Do they really value who I am? Not because I'm perfect or because I always do the right thing, but they have a well-rounded sense of who I am, and they still value me for that. You know, a good marriage or a good friendship or a good a team really means that the members of that, you know, couple, or the members of that friendship, or the members of that team are looking at each other both as valued individually, but as the collective, and what do they each bring that makes them stronger. If you think about back to when you were an adolescent, so some of us may be closer to that time than others, but there was lots of threats to those three needs, in particular threats to that idea of connection. Do people really get me? Adolescence is a time where we're all seeking status, but we're not sure how to get it. We're all seeking connections, but we don't go about receiving and forming those connections in the right way all the time. Some work I did while I was at UVA sought to answer this question I've got on the screen about the aspects of adolescent life that best predict physical health in the mid to late 20s. We had a set of longitudinal data. Longitudinal data is just data where you follow the same people over time. And they had a bunch of information about them as 13-year-olds. And they stayed in the study. It was a community-based study in Charlottesville. They had stayed in the study for 15 years. So we had data about them at all along that pathway through to the mid to late 20s. And we had lots of ideas about what we thought would be going on. We actually brought them into the lab and drew blood, and they did extensive physical health measures. We thought that it would be things about how healthy they were as adolescents, you know, their physical health in adolescence, their mental health in adolescence, that would best predict their physical health in you know, that kind of early adult phase. Some of you may kind of guess as a psychologist that I'm probably more interested in behaviors and attributes and attitudes. And sure enough, what we found was something that we kind of thought would be important, but that we didn't think would be as important as it was. And it really highlights that aspect of connection. So it turns out that these three aspects of the social environment, how lonely someone felt, and that was just a simple loneliness measure where they reported how lonely they felt as an adolescent. Their closest friendship quality. So it turns out that having lots of friends is neither good nor bad, but really what matters is having at least one high quality close friendship. That you know, that person you can turn to when you're struggling and you know you can count on them. That's true not just in adolescence, but throughout life. And then the last one, and we gave it this fancy name in the paper we wrote because as researchers we try to sound smarter than we actually are. We called it allocentrism. We borrowed it from biology, actually. It's a biology term, but it really just means connection, connectedness. It's this idea of how much do you value connection. So not how connected you currently are, but how much do you seek connection? How much do you find importance in connecting with other people? It turns out, and this is just a fancy graphic, so don't get bogged down in the numbers. If you ever take my statistics class, I can explain it in any matter of detail that you want. But the idea is basically we're trying to understand health. So we had a composite here of health from various measurements we took at age 25 to 27. And then we looked back. Okay, so what predicts best that health? You know, history of serious illness, not surprisingly, served as a significant predictor. But what we were really interested in is this connection, this allocentrism, this value of connecting with peers, not only predicted concurrently how well they were doing, but really predicted change in their health as they moved into early adulthood, as well as their mental health. So internalizing symptoms are things like anxiety, how much do you feel anxious, depression, symptoms about like how often do you feel sort of a depressed or sad mood. And what we were really interested in is how that then mattered. So we developed actually a program that that's still in implementation now to try to foster connection amongst adolescents and to really tap into this idea, because it essentially serves, it seems, as a protective factor for individuals, but it's something that has nothing to do with health at the time. It's more just a value that one either has or develops or doesn't. And so we looked at reasons why that might be. And so when we think about that theory, the self-determination theory, the notion is, as the individual gets older and progresses, how do those needs being met or not met, how do they relate to their overall satisfaction and contentment in life? And it turns out there's a pretty strong link. Not surprisingly, if you feel that connection need not being met, it tends to really impact one's well-being, both physically and mentally, as we saw. Just take a quick pause if there are any quick clarification questions on any of the theory before I move into the next one. Everybody still able to hear me just fine?
I got a question, Professor Dr. Hafen.
Yeah.
So, to what degree is the size of the sibling set when it comes to something like allocentrism? So, it's possible that someone who has siblings may wind up, seeking more connectedness through their natural state versus someone who is an only child. I don't know if you had come across that or if that's something that you had seen.
Yeah, so we didn't, the sample we had was about 190 folks. And so we did look at that because we were interested in, anytime you're doing anything developmentally that has to do with that period, you always wonder, peers can be defined as broadly as friends and siblings that are similar age. And it doesn't seem, we didn't find differences looking at those we looked at one or fewer siblings and then two or more. And we broke it out. We didn't have great numbers when we broke it out into just only children. But it didn't seem that there was a lot of difference on the allocentrism construct. There was a little bit of difference, although it wasn't significant, in mental health, like internalizing symptoms specifically, but that was specific to adolescents. So there does seem to be, but when we broke it apart, like I said, it wasn't a significant difference. And when we really dove into it, it was messy, essentially. A wonderful statistical term. It was too messy to really identify, but I think there probably is something to that. But it may just be that they seek that connection with their siblings, and maybe they seek it differently when they go into the social environment. And I think it was Vicky had raised her hand. So if Vicky, I guess I could pull up the chat box. I don't know if you want to chat in your question.
Sure, that was actually my question. So I was wondering how the size of the family may have impacted some of the findings. And just from your poll questions with the Kahoot, it just appears as though there might be trends to when people identify themselves as most happiest. When it becomes later on in life, I'm finding that more, of those individuals appear to be very lost, very disconnected when they retire. If they have smaller family sizes, they feel disconnected and they isolate, and then they end up dwindling away. So I'm just wondering if since 2012, if any of that data had been shifting in different directions.
Yeah, so, and that's a great question. I in preparation for this, I actually looked at it because I thought, I should really update that, that curve because, it's now a decade old. And the trends look remarkably similar, but what is different is that you see this stark contrast. And in fact, when I teach the developmental class, I make a point to say, we think of getting old as like this static concept of everybody's going to get old, but everybody gets older in different ways. And so you have this divergence that happiness curve doesn't really show. of people who, and the term they usually use is old versus young old. It's this idea of mindset, which we're actually going to talk about, is people that maintain that value of connection, and that can be through family or that can be through peers. They actually age better, and there's actually evidence that internally, in terms of the connections between neurons and neural pathways, their neural pathways age better than folks who start to get more isolated, who retire and maybe their whole life was about work, and maybe they put aside sort of the other connections in their life, and they're left looking and wondering where and how to connect. And I think programs that really take that on right now, especially in the environment we're in, are really going to be valuable. But it's hard to force someone to connect with other people if they choose not to, right? Even though we might know that that's really detrimental for their overall health, mentally and physically. So it's you do see that divergence that you're speaking to. So I think I'll just press forward, and then I'm happy to take questions at the end. I have the advantage of being last, so I'm happy to stay on or continue conversations with people that are interested, after this lecture. But the second theory I really wanted to highlight is a theory that's been around for a while. Carol Dweck's been writing about this for several decades, but it wasn't really until she published her book about 15 years ago, and then they re-released it, a new version a few years ago, that it really sort of took off. And it's a very kind of popular term. You'll hear it in even outside of psychology, to hear people talk about growth mindset. It's a very simple concept. If you've heard the words, like people talk about grit and perseverance, and as it relates to motivation, it's really the process by which you open yourself up to effort. So I'm going to play a couple videos. This is a nice graphic I took from online. It sort of shows how someone with a growth mindset thinks differently about challenges than someone who has a fixed mindset. But a few years ago, I came across this video. So they've been doing these TED Talks. If you've never seen one, it's experts in a field are asked to present something that they think would be interesting to the public. This particular individual was really fascinated with Carol Dweck's ideas. And so I'm going to show you a couple quick short clips of him talking about her theory. And he does so in a very eloquent way that I think will make it very relatable. And he's specifically talking about children and how sometimes the feedback we give children creates a fixed mindset versus what may be more appropriate or developmentally promotive, which is a growth mindset.
Someone who has achieved great success is Josh Waitzkin, a chess international master and the subject of the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer. Nobody has won all the national chess championships that Josh has. But even more impressive, when he turned 21, he took on the challenge of mastering something completely new and very different from chess: martial arts. He realized that he had learned how to grow and succeed, and he could apply that understanding to other domains. And so he devoted himself relentlessly to Tai Chi Chuan. And after lots of hard work, many failures, and some broken joints, he became a great martial artist, and he won 2 world championships. Now he's off to jiu-jitsu. So what does Josh say is the greatest thing that ever happened to him? Believe it or not, he says, losing my first national chess championship, because it helped me avoid many of the psychological traps. The key trap that Josh avoided was believing that he was special, that he was smarter than other people, and that he didn't have to work hard. He could have thought of himself as a prodigy, but he doesn't think that he has extraordinary intelligence. He says, the moment we believe that success is determined by an ingrained level of ability, we will be brittle in the face of adversity. Josh often quotes Stanford professor Carol Dweck, who discovered that some people see intelligence or abilities as fixed, what is called a fixed mindset, while other people see them, as Josh does, as qualities that can be developed, a growth mindset. More important, Dr. Dweck discovered that these two different mindsets lead to very different behaviors and results. In a study she did with Dr. Lisa Blackwell, several hundred seventh graders were surveyed to determine which mindset each student had, and then they were tracked for 2 years. Results showed that the students with a growth mindset, those who thought they could change their own intelligence, increased their grades over time, while those with a fixed mindset did not. You can see the trend. The gap in performance just widens and widens over time. The difference between these two groups? A different perspective on intelligence. Other studies have shown similar effects for our mindset about other abilities, like problem solving, playing sports, managing people, or anything else you'd like. Dancing la Macarena. The key to success is not simply effort or focus or resilience, but it is the growth mindset that creates them. The mindset itself is critical. Research shows that when we directly try to build grit or persistence, it is not nearly as effective as addressing the mindset that underlies them. How many of us think of ourselves as not math people, or creative, or sociable, or athletic? Or conversely, that we're naturals?
So I'm realizing I went a little longer in the beginning than I intended to. So in the interest of time, because I want to make sure I get to questions at the end, I'm going to skip the second video. In the second video, he talks more specifically about the research that Carol Dweck did, and that was research in South America. But the idea is when we think about feedback, when we're in school, when we're parents, as a parent myself, giving feedback to our kids, it's very easy oftentimes to say, wow, you did a great job with that. You're really smart. Or, hey, yeah, you're picking up math so quickly. You're really good at math. And what we're intending to do is really build up the self-esteem of the student or of our son or daughter. But what we're unintentionally doing is instilling in them this mindset that they're either good at something or they're not good at something. Instead of what she calls a growth mindset, which is, I just, if I'm struggling, it's not that I'm not good at it, I just haven't figured this out yet. I haven't figured out how to do it. And so it's about effort. And so instead we should praise the effort that went into doing well as opposed to the outcome of doing well. So it's not that easy. As a dad, I struggle with this all the time, and I know that kind of feedback is bad. But just the other day, I said to my son, he's got his red belt in karate, and I said, "Wow, you're doing so great at karate. You're really great at karate." And then I sort of heard myself in my head talking about it, and said, "It's probably because you're working so hard and you're practicing." And so I added that at the end. And when we struggle, when we're at those troughs of happiness and contentment, it's usually because we get stuck in that mode of thinking things aren't going to change. Things are always going to be this way. Things are what they are. Instead of a simple thing, which I have taken on, of just saying in my head, not yet. So when I started teaching via Zoom in the spring, unexpectedly, it went terribly at first. And it would have been very easy to try to shut down and shy away from lecturing in that format, or to just do the lecture videos and just post them as opposed to having students enter the classroom virtually. But I tried to use that idea of not yet, and I got better. And I'm still learning different things, but it's much better now than it was when I first started. A quick example. I am in my head. I know I am not ever going to build a house with my hands. I'm not the handiest. In 6th grade, I took wood shop, and our big project was to build something for our mother for Mother's Day. And I carved this mom sign out, and I went to glue it on its base. And not being very mindful at the time, I glued it upside down so it said "wow" when you placed it down. So I've always felt that that's an area that I'm just not. I can't change oil in my car. I can't, I just can't do these things. A few years ago, I moved into a townhouse, and it had a little nook off the kitchen that you couldn't really use for anything. And my wife, Kelsey, at the time, saw something on Pinterest. I had no idea what Pinterest was. She showed it to me. It was making a coffee cup holder out of a pallet. So I went to, I think it was Lowe's, and I'm not a very naturally social person, so I had to growth mindset myself into talking to someone. and say, look, I need to do this. I have no idea how to do it. And the guy spent 30 minutes walking around the store with me. He gave me a pallet because apparently they pay people to take the pallets away because they need to get rid of them. So he's like, you can have it. Got me the hooks, the screws, everything. He sort of described what I should do, gave me a plan. And it took me 3 weeks, which is way too long, but I did it. And I did it a little bit at a time, and it's still there. My sister and her husband live in the townhouse now, and it's still up 5 years later. And it's like this great achievement that I never would have approached had I not just sort of taken that not yet kind of growth mindset approach to that task. So she talks about the idea that your brain can always grow. It's a muscle. So I thought, it'd be nice to finish talking about the theory with that example. The last theory, and then I'll throw it open for questions, is the broadest. So Erik Erikson wrote, as I said, from infancy all the way through to the end of life. These two quotes I really think sum up his theory fantastically. So the first one is, he said that the more you know yourself, the more patience you have for what you see in others. I think that really highlights the notion that happiness and contentment really comes first from kind of knowing what is valuable to you, and also getting a sense for knowing what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, and finding ways not to always avoid what makes you uncomfortable. We have a tendency to do that, and that actually shuts us down in a lot of ways. The second one is the richest and fullest lives attempt to achieve an inner balance between three realms: work, love, and play. Love is not necessarily just the romantic notion of love here, but the point made earlier about, as we get older, some of us kind of get more isolated and some of us don't. It really comes to light in that balance of that quote. I thought the best way to kind of show the breadth of his theory was to show him. These are pictures of Erik Erikson himself. As a child, we all had that shared notion of being a child and being forced to wear whatever our parents put on us. I'm guessing he didn't have the autonomy to choose his own outfit in this particular picture. This is him as a father and sort of middle age, and then this is him and his wife at the towards the end of his life. And one of the things he really wrote about to highlight why the latter stage of life for many people is the most content and happy is what he called the concept of generativity. So the idea of generativity is this notion that people who value connection, but value connection in sort of what's the legacy I'm going to pass on kind of way. Many people, for those of you that are younger, you may not recognize this individual. This was one of my heroes growing up. He was in Rocky III was the first time I ever saw him, Mr. T, and then he was in a show called The A-Team, and I watched that as a child like over and over and over. But the notion is, for most people that have children and then grandchildren, that's where they find that generative quality. That's where they see, I might be coming to the end of my life, but I'm passing on who I am and what I value through my children and grandchildren. Other people choose not to have kids. In fact, the rates of people choosing not to have kids are higher than they've ever been in our society, in our country. People can still be generative without kids. But then it's more about the legacy they're leaving in the workplace or in society at large. Many people are very active in their community as they get older, that they may not have necessarily been when they were younger. And the notion is that generativity helps us to deal with traumas, and so helps deflect that potential decline in happiness in midlife by allowing us to actually access contentment in a little bit different way. So I've got just a couple more minutes and then I'll open it up to questions. I wanted to finish by saying how these three theories matter for my own life. And to use an example I've used with my students to give them a sense for who I am as a person and how I've sort of dealt with trauma of my own. So I like to think in this way of I try to always expose myself to things that are uncomfortable. I don't mean that in a physical sense, I mean that in sort of a mental sense, right? And then adapt and integrate that into my life. Unfortunately, I know that life doesn't always sort of ask us if we're ready for a challenge, right? Nobody asked for a pandemic to hit so that we'd all have to sit on computers rather than a lecture hall today. And a few years ago, I sort of got hit with some challenges back to back that were pretty intense. So I got married in June of 2014. This is my mom. I didn't marry a cougar. This is my mother, and it was like the happiest day for me, but also for her. This was she was always looking forward to my sister and I getting married, and I was the first to get married, and it was amazing. A year and a half later, October 2015, and my mom passed away. It was pretty sudden the way it happened. She had had some health issues. We thought she was passed, and she went downhill pretty quickly. And it, as anyone who's lost someone knows, like it was totally devastating. I was in that trough in terms of contentment and happiness in my life. But I had someone in my life who just sort of, like I said before, really got me and really knew how to reach me in a positive way and not push me to sort of get past losing my mom, but to get past it in the right way. And then 2 months later, my wife Kelsey and I found out she was pregnant with our first child. It would have been my mom's first grandchild. And it was amazing because it was this weird happiness that sort of evolved as I thought about having a daughter, and she has the same middle name as my mom, and it really sort of was a way for me to see my mom continue even though I had lost her. Fast forward to August 2016, the day my daughter Harper was born, my wife Kelsey passed away. Again, unexpected, didn't, nothing saw that I could have predicted would have happened. But I at least had a transcript for what that grief process was going to be like, even though I would never have imagined losing the two most important people in my life back to back like that. But I had this little thing that I had to sort of protect and take care of and figure out how to relate to. And she really got me through it, even though she had no idea what was going on. She's almost 4 now, and we talk about her mom at times, and she has this positive image because she can, I think, really sense that I have this positive image of who her mom was, as opposed to dwelling on some of the negativity that still hits me from time to time, but that I find a way to move past. Fast forward to now, a couple years after that, I got married again. She actually is also a professor at Nova. So another shout out for Nova faculty. You can find a partner in the workforce. And she had lost her husband as well. And so she and I had that shared kind of understanding of what that was like. But we got to build this amazing new family. This is my daughter Harper. This is Anna, our youngest daughter. This is Abigail, our oldest daughter, and this is Caleb, our oldest son. And we now have just a couple months ago brought into the world our youngest son, James, here wearing his Manchester United jersey because I'm a big soccer fan. And it really sort of highlights what I think I would love for all of you to take away from this is that those 3 theories, if you just rely on the simple aspect of them, the mindset of not yet, I'm struggling, but I'll get past it, I've just not passed it yet. Relying on deep connections in self-determination theory, really focusing on the people that matter, and then trusting in that Ericksonian process. And if we're all fortunate, we'll live to 92 the way he did, by focusing on knowing who we are and our identity, forming connections with people, and then by the time we progress through middle and into late adulthood, really focusing on legacy and impact and what matters and how we're leaving that message. And that's what I hope to do. So if you catch yourself thinking about this lecture at any point over the next few weeks or months or whatever, I hope that that's kind of the process that maybe you'll go through, and maybe one day you'll be struggling and you won't know what to do, and you'll be really wanting to find yourself bored all over again. And I'm happy now that I know this is recorded for you to share this lecture once more, and hopefully it'll sort of give you some tips for what you might lean on. So I took longer than I was supposed to, which I guess is not good. But hopefully you enjoyed the lecture. I'd love to hear from you if you want to send me an email at any time. But I'm happy to answer questions now as well.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Hafen. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
I appreciate the cutie patootie comments.
Vicky White.
Yes. So this question was asked in the chat. So I just wanted to kind of vocalize it because I had the same question as well. Is there a way, or are there strategies that you can use to change a fixed mindset into a growth mindset when it's kind of become a learned behavior and a learned response to how you navigate, life?
Yeah, so I can share what I went through. There is no easy step, and you won't ever get rid of that fixed mindset. Almost all of us, that was kind of drilled into us throughout childhood. And like most things, the things that happen in childhood stay with us even if we wish they wouldn't. The thing to do is similar to if you're trying to get rid of negative stereotypes you might hold, is to bring them consciously to your mind consistently. So what I did is I actually would write at the end of the night. I would just write down, like, for a couple minutes, things that happened during the day that I felt frustrated by, or that I was having trouble letting go, or that I struggled with. And then the next morning when I woke up, I didn't really try to fix them, but I just paid attention to it. And I sort of tried to switch it to say, what can I do about that today so that today's experience is a little different than yesterday's? And that, for me, from what I read about other people's approaches, that really seemed to work. And Carol Dweck in her book kind of talks about that. Is one thing we can do as adults is try not to do that to the kids we interact with. Try to praise their effort rather than their achievements. But for ourselves, I think, just being consciously aware is really the thing you can do. And you won't get rid of it, but you'll find yourself improving over time. It's like anything else. It requires time and effort, but you will see progress. It may just be slower than you hoped.
So another question is, could you recommend books to parents on how to help their children to change their
Yes. So, and actually I have a list, but I don't have it on this computer because I had some students ask me that very same question in the spring. So I have a list. So if you'd email me, I'm happy to send you that. And then that would also kind of start an ongoing conversation that maybe I could share more videos and stuff. There's actually quite a few programs across the country where schools are trying to make impacts over changing not just the students' mindset, but the mindset of the teachers. And so I could also, if you're interested in being bored by some research, share some of that research and what they actually do in schools for that. So yeah, please just email me. I'm happy to share. I've got a whole list, but I've got them ranked by what I think are super technical books that most people probably wouldn't find a ton of enjoyment out of, to very easy reads that have some very good concrete suggestions.
I have a question for you, Professor Hafen.
Sure.
Hey,
Yeah.
sorry about that. Do you think that, I'm glad you mentioned instructional professionals and teachers and looking at their own mindset as well. My research has shown that oftentimes the certain academic disciplines have a static concept of academic ability, and the subject matter gets taught that way. Mm-hmm. And the students wind up matching a certain kind of profile of who the teachers think will be successful in the disciplines. So to that end, how can we as educators maybe do some things to maybe broaden our own growth mindset as we push the information out to our students?
I think the number one thing is remembering, as much as we can, trying to remember what it was like when we were a student. It's very easy if a student, for instance, is not turning in assignments consistently. As a professor, it's very easy to get frustrated with that student, and instead of trying to figure out the underlying reasons for that, we start in our head unconsciously or consciously start labeling that student as just a bad student, and that sort of way of getting fixed on that. There's no, again, just like the previous question, there's no one fix for that. I think that the best thing to do is to really, especially at the start of a semester, really try to get a sense for students individually. And one of the reasons I share that personal story that I finished with today is because I've found that sharing personal aspects to the extent I'm comfortable makes students more comfortable reaching out to me when they're struggling with something. And it helps me to sort of get away from labeling them as a bad student, and instead understanding, yeah, they probably need to develop a more organized life in terms of getting in their assignments. But now I know, because they were comfortable sharing with me, that their car died and they've been, don't have the money to get it fixed, or their computer crashed and they don't have any money to get that fixed. And by them then being comfortable to reach out, it gives me a more broad understanding of who they are. But I think that's the key, is to see students as people, just like we might want someone else to see us as a person when we're getting angry emails about why they received such and such grade and why this happened, or when we're missing a deadline and we had a lot of stuff going on but nobody seems to care about that aspect. I think that's the thing that I really try to push forward, and again, I think that helps us see each other as people rather than just as professor and student.
So I see there's a question. So it's a great lecture. At an older age, do we tend to lose self-confidence? This person is 80 and they feel like it.
Yeah, so I obviously never having experienced that personally, but having talked with, for instance, talking with my grandparents when I was in graduate school and they were around that age, I think the issue for most people becomes you have a pretty good sense for what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy as you get older, and you're able to kind of cut out a lot of what you don't enjoy. But particularly trying new things, joining a lecture on Zoom, doing things that you've never really done before, the learning curve seems so much steeper the older you get that it's very easy. And in fact, you do see what seems counterintuitive. You do see higher rates of struggling with self-confidence as people get older. That seems counter to what I presented in the lecture about people feeling more content and happy. And I think the key is really that mindset approach. At a younger age, I'm almost 40, I'm 38 now. It was easier for me to relearn some of the bad mindset habits I had formed in childhood and adolescence as an early adult. If I had kept those same fixed sort of approaches throughout my entire life and then had to try new things at 75, 80, it would be very easy for me to shut down, to lose self-confidence. And I think that's where that mindset approach, that not yet approach, really can help deflect some of that decline in self-confidence. Because you won't pick things up as quickly as you did before, but there's good evidence to suggest trying new things consistently helps keep you cognitively engaged, which ultimately helps build back some of that self-confidence that may start to drift.
All right, so does anyone have any questions for Dr. Hafen?
Well, as I said, if anybody does in the future, I'd be happy to, if you just email me, I'd be happy to share more information, or if you're interested in any other topic that's related to behavior. The beauty of psychology is that it really applies to life in all number of areas. I'm certainly not an expert on everything, but I know a little bit about the research literature in a lot of different areas, so I'd be happy to touch base with anybody.
Yes. All right, so no other questions. Dr. Hafen, thank you so much for sharing. That was a really heartfelt lecture. Thank you. And thank you for everyone for participating. So we look forward to having another, I think we're supposed to continue this into the next semester, hopefully. So
yeah, thanks
thank
for
you.
doing it as well. It was really a pleasure, and I love this format to be able to connect with people outside the Nova community. So it's fantastic. I appreciate your guys' hard work.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
All right.
Bye
Have a
bye.
good
Thank
day,
you all so
David.
much.
Bye.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you so very much.
No problem at all. Our pleasure. Our pleasure. All right, I'm going to go ahead and shut this one down, okay? Thank you, guys.
Oh, don't forget to save the chat.
I did. I've saved it several times throughout.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
All right.
Appreciate it.